Every interaction is an opportunity to build trust or lose trust. Nothing is neutral.
Totally. And I say the same thing, but in a different way. My father and both of my grandfathers having been bankers, I would say it this way. Trust is like a bank account. You're either making deposits or making withdrawals. Your money is not just sitting there idle.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we make inadvertent withdrawals, and we're going to talk about some of that today. Our deposits seem to be more conscious. Our withdrawals seem to be like, oh gosh, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah.
Some of it's conscious, because we just do dumb things, all of us, even the best leaders, right? Which goes back to what we talked about in the previous episode. Just having good accountability and legitimate governance is mainly to protect you against yourself.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to another episode of It's Next Sunday, the podcast with Jim Shepard, where we get the chance to talk about all things faith and growth and maturing in our journey and honestly, things that are just crossing our mind.
Football?
We'll save that for later. Let's see how the season goes.
Our relationship to this point.
Yeah, Georgia,
it hasn't
Tennessee.
been Tennessee and Georgia.
Yeah.
We've navigated that to this point, but it hasn't been football season. So
Right.
now we're going to have to figure out how to do this podcast and you and I stay in here and not talk about football.
That's fair. That's fair. So here's my philosophy. I am a Tennessee fan first and an SEC fan second. So I'm good to cheer on Georgia most of the time. So that's just how I look at it.
That makes you a better man than I am, because I'm not at that point. I'm Georgia number one.
Georgia number two, Georgia number three.
Else.
No, I want to see SEC represent for sure.
But you know this. Now, I think you do know this. So I'm third generation University of Georgia, right? Mm-hmm. So, but that's not why I love the University of Georgia. Why do I love the University of Georgia? Because on a blind date to a football game at the University of Georgia in my junior year, I met Nancy. And that worked out really well for me.
She's the best.
I'm not sure how well it worked out for her, but I know it worked out well for me.
She likes you.
When we talk about the University of Georgia and you see me get enthusiastic, I love UGA, bro, but that's why I love
Special memory.
Special memory.
I love that.
By the way, we won the game that day too.
Yeah.
Just in case you were tracking.
I think you were tracking.
Georgia won. I won bigger.
Oh, there you go. And that's strong. That's strong.
That'll play well when Nancy watches this podcast.
Yeah. How many times have you used that on Nancy? You've saved that one up.
You could ask that little note. He says he won. What about you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We'll see how that goes.
It's great to be here today.
It is good.
Yeah.
We haven't had enough time together lately, it feels like.
Summer, kind of running. You've been running. I've been running. We kind of keep track of each other a little bit. But
of course,
it's the first time we've seen each other in like 2 weeks.
So this is good.
We talked about not being canceled. This could go south really fast today.
All right, because we're just unfiltered.
Let's not, though.
Let's keep going. Let's stay on the wall.
I love the topic today, Frank. I love the topic we're talking about today.
Yeah.
You know, I talk about this a lot in so many ways, both directly and indirectly. But we've got both some research, some observations you've made, some observations I've made, and I'm excited for us to cover this topic today.
Yeah, what we're talking about today is about trust in the church. Like where has it gone astray? Where are there opportunities to rebuild some trust? Where may there be some kind of surprises in things that we're taking for granted or assuming that we're all good in this area with our congregation or our community, but maybe we need to do a little homework to realize that there's some trust building to be done. As Seth Godin has said, and I think I've shared it once on this podcast before, every interaction is an opportunity to build trust or lose trust. Nothing is neutral.
Totally. And I say the same thing, but in a different way. My father and both of my grandfathers having been bankers, I would say it this way. Trust is like a bank account. You're either making deposits or making withdrawals. Your money is not just sitting there idle.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we make inadvertent withdrawals, and we're going to talk about some of that today. Our deposits seem to be more conscious. our withdrawals seem to be like, oh gosh, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah.
Some of it's conscious, because we just do dumb things, all of us, even the best leaders, right? Which goes back to what we talked about in the previous episode. Just having good accountability and legitimate governance is mainly to protect you against yourself. Bad choices morally, but bad choices today we're talking about in leadership, and how you lead the church and how you embody trust, that people trust you. Because here's the deal, Frank. You can like this or not like this. As a leader, if they trust you, they'll probably trust the organization. And if they don't trust you, they probably won't trust the organization. And that's not to put an extra burden on you. That burden is already on you, whether you know it or not.
What a great point. We're not adding to the challenge of leadership. It is a reality of leadership.
Let's shine a light on it. And let's talk about that in a way that could help you. And, part of it too, Frank, is that, in churches in particular, trust seems to move around whether you did it or not. Right? And we're going to talk about that some today. So, I'm in a church where we had, a founding pastor who went 42 years with nothing. I was no dirt on him. And what Peterson calls, what does Eugene Peterson say? A long obedience in the same direction. Yeah. My pastor had that, right? But what we know is we have people who come in and bruised and battered from other experiences, and we have to deal with that. Even though we didn't do it, we have to deal with that because they're part of our constituency, right? And we want to talk about some of that today. How do you deal with trust when you didn't do it, but people come in and they're bruised and battered and carry those experiences in with them? Right?
That's so good. That's so good. For some reason in society in general, some recent statistics have come out stating that organizational trust as a whole overall has declined. Yeah. Right? People are just cautious of big organizations or companies or churches. We've seen, obviously, we're most concerned about the church, and we've seen that in the 70s, over 60% of people in a survey would say that they had trust in the local church. That number, as of 2023, is 32%.
That's staggering. Frank.
Staggering decrease in built-in trust. So where do you see that shift coming? Do you think that some of the issues happening culturally are impacting that? Or are we just shooting ourselves in the foot? Or maybe it's a little bit of both?
A, B, and C?
Yeah, A, B, and C.
Is there a D, all of the above?
That's exactly right.
I think there needs to be a D, all of the above. Yeah, it's a staggering statistic. And you know what bothers us, when we hear stuff like that, I'm just sitting here, what grieves my heart is like the thing that Jesus spoke to Peter about at Caesarea Philippi. My church, Peter, I'm going to build that on you, right? And I've been to Caesarea Philippi, an amazing place, right? I've stood in that place. And the thing that he said, my bride is one of the least trusted organizations out there.
Yeah.
Frank, whoa. I mean, how can we begin to, and that's what we're going to talk about. How do we take steps to reverse that out today? So I would say there's several things that I think have happened. One is the rise of the megachurch. The rise of the megachurch. Megachurches are not inherently bad by their nature. But what happens is because they become big, and there's a lot of stuff that happens that people don't see. It's like, bro, I just don't know. I just don't know if I can trust them. I mean, it feels, when I give there, it feels like a big black hole. I'm giving money. I don't know what happens. I don't know what the finances of the church are. I don't know what the impact is when I give money there, right? And so there are these inherently unintentional things that we might do. By the way, I'm not talking about moral failures or financial irregularities. I'm just talking about habits and customs and culture that we create that don't really embody trust as a natural response, right? And then you're looking at other organizations and, or other churches and, look at that guy, the guys that make the headlines, right? So the taint stains all of us.
Yeah.
One guy may make the headlines, or one church may make the headlines. It's not your church, but that taint permeates the church as a whole, organizationally, right? And so the rise of the mega church, not that we don't trust them, but we don't know. And sometimes when we don't know what's happening, we assume things are on maybe the negative side. That's kind of what I say to pastors and churches in terms of communication. The problem with communication is when you're not telling people, they already are asking the question. And the problem is they're filling in that blank with a negative answer, not the more positive answer that you would have. It's important, right?
Absolutely.
So I think there's kind of this the phenom of the mega. There's the cultural thing, right? So much is happening in so many organizations in government. You know, we almost get to the point of, I think, in exasperation sometimes, and this is an election year, you know, we see all of the foolishness playing out. By the way, that's a red and a blue issue. Don't send me any email. I'm purple. It's a red and a blue issue. We see all of that playing out, and we get, you know, sometimes in exasperation, I just get to the point, and I'm not this guy. You know me. I'm a glass half full guy. I'm trying to believe the best, but I get to the point, and I'm just like, who can you trust?
Right.
So I think culturally, you know, there's something to play in there, and then of course we have how it gets lived out at the local level. What we have done at local churches, that we have not just we've taken trust for granted, and you can't take trust for granted. You've got to be building trust. You've got to be making those deposits. Bro, here's what we know. All of us, the best of us, on our best days, we will inadvertently stumble, do stupid things, and write a check. Yeah. The problem is when the check is bigger than the bank account. Yeah. Same thing that happens over here at Renaissance Bank, right across the way. The check comes in and it's not, you've always got, so you've got to be building trust because you know you're going to write checks against that. So at the local level, don't take trust for granted. Always be building in us, sowing seeds of trust and helping people to get there. So
that's so good. Yeah. That's so good. I think there's another thing I would add to what may have led to this deterioration of trust, just nationally, okay? Obviously at the church level is the microscope that is never-ending news and never-ending social media. In order to find more things to talk about, sometimes we're making bigger things out of small things, or big things become even bigger things. And so they feel more pervasive than maybe as real, or it oftentimes feels like we'll see something and it gets so big that somehow it's affecting us, when in all reality, it may not be affecting us in any way, shape, or form in our life. Yeah. But because we're hearing so much about it, we're seeing so much about it, it just creates this anxiety that we're getting hit in areas we have no control over. So what is our tendency? If we start to lack trust, we pull in tight. What can we trust? What can we control? And so we bring it all together. We're going, okay, that's a reality. We also have the foregone conclusion that used to be there, that once again, people just had this kind of default nature of trusting church that has eroded over time, specifically with a couple of new generations that have developed. They've changed their posture and just the way they operate in trust in general, wouldn't you say?
I would say absolutely, absolutely. And I think what's happened, Frank, with some of the things you just referenced, one of the things that occurs in churches is that we begin to hold our cards a little closer. We begin to be less transparent. Not that we have something to hide. Sometimes it's the good things, right? So I'll hear things like, well, Pastor, why don't you publish your finances on a regular basis? Well, Jim, we're actually 17% ahead of budget, and we don't want people to see that, because if they see that we're doing so well, they might not give to us. Okay. That's another topic. We've covered that previously. I'm sure we'll go back there again.
Absolutely.
That is symptomatic of a transactional mindset of giving, that people are giving to need and not giving out of a biblical understanding of what God is asking us to do with money. Money's meant to transform us, not to just do a transaction with the church. We've covered that before. I'm sure we'll go back to it again.
Absolutely.
But that's what that is. Here's what I would say to you. Bro, I remember when the Atlanta Braves, our hometown team, couldn't win a game. I mean, they couldn't beat anybody. You could go down there, and we used to joke that, first prize was 2 tickets to a Braves game. Second prize was 4 tickets. You could go to home to the pitcher's mound with your 12-gauge shotgun and the choke wide open, and you could shoot it anywhere you wanted to, and you wouldn't hit anybody.
Yeah.
But once they started winning games, you couldn't find a ticket.
Yeah.
And I believe that's what happens in the church, right? When you are transparent and people see that you're doing well, people who haven't understand, like, oh, I want to get on the winning team, right? So your transparency, your authenticity actually works against you. And I think that's what's the problem in kind of the larger church movement, not just mega churches, but churches in general. We've closed the curtain and we've hidden what's behind here, not because we don't want people to see for bad reason. It's just like, maybe we don't want them to know how good we're doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's other things, right? Well, hey, if they knew what our deficit was, well, solve that.
Right.
Right? And so this lack of transparency that comes about as these cultural norms, right? Social media feeds that.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh gosh, if I put that out there, it's going to show up in a post somewhere, and then I'm going to invite all of this publicity or criticism or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But we've got to get past that, Frank. We've got to think in terms of what would be the best to show the integrity of what we're doing in the name of Christ right here at the local church. If he reflects a high standard of excellence, the highest, then we should follow that and try to do that and show people that we're doing that. So I think it comes as a consequence of all the things you're talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's this tension of going, okay, how transparent can I be without creating more work for myself? So there's this hesitancy of going, well, once I'm so transparent, suddenly people are going to ask more questions. And so what do? We retract, we pull back, we give less information because then there's less to ask questions about. And ultimately that's going to backfire. And so we see that negativity.
Yeah.
From a generational standpoint, what are you seeing different in the way boomers respond to trust in the local church, either finances or not, versus some of our younger generations? Have you seen a shift in the way they operate or their posture in general?
So, yeah, I think definitely there is. As I watch it play out, Frank, there is a difference. I mean, I think everybody who knows me, and if you've watched any episodes of this podcast, you know that I have a passion for hanging around with and developing younger leaders. Yeah. So I think I've got the ability to speak with this with some understanding. As I watch kind of boomers for sure, Gen X maybe a little less so, I think the divide happens between Gen X and millennials and then exacerbates into Gen Z. And here's what it is. In my generation, in the boomer generation, I am a boomer, just to confirm that. And for any of you who might have wondered, I'm a boomer. So in my generation, the default on trust is, I will trust you until you give me a reason not to. And I think that's generally reflected at Gen X. But once you get to millennials, you can see that shift. And it goes in the opposite direction. The default becomes, and more so even at Gen Z, the default becomes, I don't trust you, and now you have to give me a reason to trust you, which I think has dramatic implications for churches that are leading into the future and trying to develop their next generation people, whether it be millennials, Gen Z, and then, of course, Gen Alpha coming behind them. I think you've got to think in terms of more transparency, not less. More reason to, hey, you can trust us, not less, which is showing things that maybe you've previously held in secret. Now, by the way, let me just stop and clarify here, because I know there's probably somebody out there thinking, I would be thinking, well, Jim, you don't want us to tell everything. No, we're not at all saying that, Frank. I like to clarify that in the church, there's need to know information and there's nice to know information. Right? So like, let's just say, for example, if there's a staff member who departs suddenly, maybe for good reason, maybe there's a story. HR issues are highly sensitive, and people always want to pick and know everything. And here's what I would say. For 97, 99% of you, we're going to tell you what you need to know. And that's all you need to know. The people who know the other stuff are the people who make decisions for our church, and they're our elected leaders. And so if for some reason you're saying, well, I'm wondering what happened, well, then what you're doing is you're reflecting the fact that you don't trust the elected leaders who handle these situations in our church.
That's right.
Right? And that's a whole nother issue. That's a whole nother issue. But we can't disclose those things to you because of legal, and even if they weren't legal, we wouldn't do it anyway because it's not appropriate. It's not appropriate for us to bring all the dirty laundry in front of the church. We have people in our church. If we have legitimate governance, right? Remember, we covered that in the last one.
Yeah.
We have people who deal with the dirty laundry in our church, and you can trust those as men, and if your governance permits it, women of God who know how to handle these matters rightly.
Yeah.
And so you can trust us in that. And so I don't want anything that we're saying here to just say, we just pull the veil wide open and we show you everything. No, we don't. We tell you what you need to know. And for most churches, there's a lot more of that we're not telling that we probably should tell. Does that help? I mean, is that
absolutely?
I wouldn't want somebody to think you and I are just talking about wholesale, just dump the vault. That's not even wise. Not even wise.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said about there's HR compliance issues in this. One of the centers that we have, the phase centers, we have one up in DC with Mark Batterson up there, and I'll never forget during COVID. Okay, so everybody had lots of opinions about COVID and how things.
You're running public space with children
in
during
DC
COVID.
during COVID, yeah. And so
what could go wrong?
Yeah, parents had all kinds of questions. Mask up, not mask up. We had to shut down a classroom due to COVID, right? Following the protocols, okay? Nobody got sick. Everything ended up being totally fine. We followed the protocols, okay? No problem. Had a mom call us. Or she sent an email, a very long email about how she felt like we should operate differently. Okay. I saw the email come through. I saw the frustration in the email. I didn't even email back. I just called her. I just circumvented everybody. I said, clearly this mom is distressed, heartbroken, frustrated, trying to figure out what to best do with her kid. That's where it was coming from. It was lots of opinions, but at the end of the day, she's just trying to figure out how to make the best decision for her kid. And so I get on the phone with her and she said, I want to know this, I want to know this, I want to know this. And I said, I want you to know that. I understand what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to make the best decision for your family, and you're trying to figure out how directly, basically, her kid was exposed to COVID or not. I can't tell you that. I want to give you everything I can for you to make the best decision for your family and stay compliant. And if we can keep that posture in everything that we do when it comes to church governance, I understand when it comes to communicating, being transparent about finance or anything else. I understand you're making decisions for your family, your finances. Do you want to sow into this ministry or whatever it may be? I understand you want a lot of information in order to make the best decision. We are going to give you everything we can in an appropriate way. Make sure we're not alienating anything, once again, practically or legally, and doing so. But we understand and want you to have the information you need to make the best decision with what God's entrusted to your care, your family, and your finances. And I'll tell you, it caught her off guard because there were a couple things where I said, I want you to know that. I understand why you're asking that. I can't give you that. And it was a very disarming thing for her because she was like, oh, they're not trying to be difficult here. They're not trying to hurt me or my family. They're trying to be compliant, but also serve. And I think when it comes to church context, there are times where people don't know where that line is. They don't know what we're allowed to do and not allowed to do, what's best for everybody, what's not best for everybody. And so when there's that volatility or frustration or somebody's questioning something, taking them to coffee and or jumping on the phone can be a game changer. Because, I mean, I genuinely feel like this lady was ready to write an article, opinion post, and like rake us over the coals. And by the time we were done, it was a very different conversation because she understood what we were trying to do and the fine line we were trying to walk. But we understood what she was frustrated by or hurting by. So in relationship, it's only through relationship, engagement, connection that we can really get to the source of why that trust is broken or being broken or that baggage they came before. There's no pastor that from a stage can address a very specific personal hurt from previous baggage that's created a lack of trust from the stage, it's just going to automatically make that all better. That's going to happen with some slow trust building that leads to a relationship with someone who then goes, oh, I'm in a safe space to process what I'm feeling, understand this. We've got to be willing to invite those conversations to happen, but they're not magically going to be addressed by a email that goes out or some broad statement from the pulpit.
The scenario you just let, first of all, God bless Frank. That's why you're involved in child development centers and I'm not. Right? God bless you. But what you just shared, Frank, was a perfect example of how I've explained trust inside of churches. And it's this. Trust is giving the benefit of the doubt between what you know or don't know, actually what you don't know about the situation, and what I know as one who was in authority over the situation, and listen to this, and believing that if you knew what I know, you would have made the same decision I did.
That's so good, Jim.
Right? That's the gap. It's the I don't know, but you know. And so what you did was you leaned in and you said, I do know. And I'd love for you to know, but I can't.
Yeah.
Right? That's a perfect example of that. And that's what it really is. Because with church people, you know, in particular, I've watched this in my own church and in lots and lots of churches over the years. That's what happens. I don't know all the facts. And until I know the facts, I won't believe that you handled this correctly. Yeah. That is a lack of trust.
Absolutely.
That is a lack of trust in the people who oversee these. And by the way, I'm not saying that there couldn't be issues where you need to replace some people who are in authority. That's a matter for you to resolve through the governance of your church. And hopefully you have legitimate governance where that can happen, right? But that's symptomatic of that. It's an HR situation or anything else. It's a financial situation, whatever it might be. You have all the facts because you're an executive pastor of that church. You're the executive director of that organization. You have all the facts. I have limited information. And by the way, here's where it also gets and a lot of emotion because I like this person you just got rid of.
That's right.
So now we've got it turbocharged to another level. And my emotion prevents me from believing the best because I want to believe that this person actually should have been kept on board and you got rid of them. And therefore I don't trust you. But trust says, you know a lot more than I do. And if I knew what you know, I would have made the exact same decision that you made.
Yeah.
Right? And if we could see more of that in local churches, bro, come on.
Game changer, because I don't know that we're going to see it in other environments. I don't know that in the political space.
You're saying it's not going to happen in D.C.?
The political space.
I hear you. Keep it on track. Jim, remember,
come on, Jim.
Trying not to get canceled here. We don't want to get canceled.
In the political space, we're just seeing an ongoing deterioration.
Totally.
There was something that came up politically several years ago involving some military decision. Okay, I don't remember what it was. And I just remember my Facebook account blew up. Everybody had an opinion. And my thought in the moment was, we have no idea. Like the information that we have is so infinitesimal. I don't know if they made the right decision or not, but I can't even judge that or estimate because I have less than 1% of the information. And so it was so funny because I was seeing all this commentary and I was like, you can't make that assumption. So here's what I'll say. I don't know that that's going to get fixed politically anytime soon, no matter what's getting, doesn't matter the party, but I think in the church it can be. And I'll tell you something, very specific example. Pastor Aaron Burke down in Radiant Church, last, I want to say October, I just happened to be passing through his town, and I went to church there on a Sunday. And the message was essentially this: I'm sorry. And he preached an entire sermon that was, if we've done anything to hurt you, not based on something that happened, if we've ever mishandled you, or if we didn't follow up with you and you were expecting a phone call from a prayer request, or you've come here and you've been hurt from the church and you're giving it a try again, can I just start by saying, I'm sorry, and that wasn't our intent, and can we go to coffee? And he literally preached an entire sermon with no other motive. So it wasn't coming off the heels of some scandal or issue or whatever. It was part of his teaching series where he just said, I think we need to say this. I'm sorry for the things I did wrong that I didn't even know I did wrong. But let's work on it. Let's build some trust. And so I love that posture that he had in that moment. It was just admirable. My first time attending the church, first time seeing the church, and it was like very inviting and freeing to see him come in and go, I may have done something wrong. I'm apologizing in advance for things I don't even know if I did them wrong, but that wasn't my intent. That wasn't my heart. Let's heal. Or if somebody else did it, let's go to coffee. Let's spend some time together. Let's look eye to eye. Let's work through this. And I think if the church took a posture that people coming through the doors have had a rough week and someone else has broken trust and how easy it could be for the church to break trust. Once again, I wrote a prayer request and I turned it in and no one ever followed up. And I really thought somebody was going to reach out. It may have gotten prayed over by all the elders of the church for weeks on end. But if they didn't know it happened, they're sitting there going, I wrote my first prayer request. I've never written one before. I write one, I'm very vulnerable. And I don't know where that card went. I don't know if anybody did anything with it. Did it get left on the seat? Did somebody else see it? Your mind just starts to develop a whole different narrative. And so for us to, first of all, say, I'm sorry for the things we don't even know that we did wrong. And certainly if we're missing it or not being transparent, for us to say, we want to build more trust in this relationship. Let's actively pursue trust. It's a game changer for the church.
Well, I love that for a lot of reasons because that's just so rare to see that.
Yeah.
Somebody to do that. The other thing is I'm just thinking, man, I probably should do that. Just go apologize in advance for all the dumb stuff I'm about to do that hasn't become evident yet, right? Because I just know it's going to happen. Yeah. It's not even something I'm wondering about.
Oh, that's so good.
Right. But that's what we're talking about. What if the church could be the better example? Be the better example. Yeah. Set the standards, set the pace, set the temperature for all of these experiences that people are having somewhere else where they're just like, oh, I knew I couldn't trust you. Yeah. I knew I couldn't trust you. Yeah. And we are the ones that are like, hey, I'm remembering, so you talk about this in leadership. I'm thinking about a pastor, client of mine some years ago. They raised $12 million for a new building and some renovation. It was a really big project, ended up transforming the whole church and setting them off on a new trajectory. But after a lot of really careful work, very smart people working on this, it came back and it was not 12 million, it was 16.2 million. 33% more. And this church had never done anything like that for years. It was a watershed moment for them. And it was, and the executive pastor called me and we started talking and we went through the whole thing. And the pastor got involved. He had not really been in any of the meetings. He had not really been a part of the research, the due diligence, or anything. And he said this, I'm going to take the hit for this. I'm going to take the hit for this. So he stood up on a Sunday morning to tell the church that this thing that they had believed with all their hearts they could do with 12 million, they were going to have 16 million. And he stood up there and he said something to the effect of this, Frank. And he said, and I know that many of you are looking for and would love to find somebody to blame. But we have smart, godly men and women who've been on these committees and have done all this. And here's what I want to say to you. If you're looking for somebody, I'm your guy. He said, remember the game, Pin the Tail on the Donkey? Yeah. He said, if you're looking for a donkey to pin the tail on, I'm your boy. Yeah. Frank, they responded, and that church gave another $4 million to fund the whole thing. That's leadership. Yeah. That's humility. Yeah. That's owning it, even though you were not a part of the cause. It's doing what Aaron did, right? Yeah. It's just taking that humble posture, and yet for many of us, our response is pride and resistance and denial. Yeah. And I'll keep this and we'll solve it another way and we'll try to navigate around. And we're just like, the easier thing would have been just to go out and own it in front of your people and let it go from there. Because so the very thing that could have been a massive withdrawal from their account, the project went 1/3 over budget. This was not in COVID, by the way. This is well before that. Ended up being a trust builder. Yeah. The thing that could have been an overdraft on their account ended up, because he walked out there and said, I'm your guy, ended up being a trust builder, right?
You know what? That statement is so powerful. That's huge. It makes me think, what if when we're making decisions inside the church that seem like a shift of something for other people that's going to impact the congregation in some way, financially, doing a new building, doing a campaign, changing the way they do their small group structure, whatever it may be. What if before they communicate or as they're working through the process, they ask the question, is this a trust builder? Mm. And if they're not, if they can't say yes to that, there's more work to be done, more conversations to have. At the end of the day, they should be more confident in the leadership by the work that's been done to make this pivot, this adjustment, this change. And yet our posture is sometimes inside the church, well, God's laid this on our heart. We got a handful of people that have agreed. Everybody else needs to get on board. Well, that posture isn't always a trust builder. And they're like, well, when the results show up later, they'll know. It's like, no. Let's let them know now, and let them know that there was due diligence and effort and energy that was put in this. And we really feel like this is where God's leading us. And we want to tell you why, and use it as an opportunity from the front end as much as possible to say, how do we communicate this in a clear way that it builds trust instead of causing that? I don't understand why they did that. I don't understand that move. Well, let's let them behind the curtain a little bit. Let's let them see the decision-making process, the amount of hours and energy and effort that went into coming to this conclusion, rather than saying, ta-da, here's our big announcement, a 1-minute hype video.
So I love that. And here's where I love, and I speak a lot about this. I think you've seen me talk about this in terms of developing giving and generosity at the local church level. Trust is a factor. Yeah. So we talk about, we always talk about building discipleship in the giving posture. It's a big deal for us, right? There's that. And then there's the idea of showing examples of what happens when we do give impact, and then also showing giving stories, right? But the third piece is building trust. And of course, this is all through your giving moments, which we've spoken about separately, and I'm sure we'll speak about again. But people don't think about trust. So think about this. Trust, and what if you talked about trust 4 times a year? I like to advocate for 4 times a year, and I would say on the 5th Sundays. There's 4 of them every year. You know when they're coming up, and you can just schedule. Hey, in advance, we're going to have, and it's going to be somebody from our board, somebody from our trustees, one of the elders of our church. Hi, my name is Jim Shepard. I serve as an elder here. My background is accounting and finance, and surprisingly, as a result of that, I end up overseeing a lot of the financial and other procedures of the church and finances of the church, right? I'd like to speak with you this morning for a moment about why you can trust us when you give here. And I want to put in, and so there's a lot of ways to say that, but here's where I want to insert a plug for an organization that I have a lot of respect for, ECFA, Evangelical Council on Financial Accountability. Those guys have standards. There's 7 of them. Some of it is finances, some of it's governance, some of it's compensation to leaders, all kinds of things. But what I'd say is, hey, this morning I'd like to just take Article 3, Standard 3, and let's talk about that. We're members of ECFA, but let's talk about what that means. And I talk about Standard number 3 and how that means you can trust us. So it's someone who is non-staff in an oversight position in the church, speaking to the church overtly. And people are like, wow, I didn't know that about our church. That's pretty cool that we do it that way, right? So it's a trust builder, right? You're making those deposits, right? I was just thinking when you were going through that a minute ago, I was like, what would it look like for us to have an image of a deposit slip and an image of a check on the PowerPoint in the room with the executive leadership team when they're doing that? And the pastor's like, hey, let's just pull this slide up. Which one is this? Is it a deposit slip or are we writing a check? Yeah. Right? Are we building trust, or are we unintentionally? Now, by the way, that's not to say every now and then you don't have to consciously write a check. Oh, right. I mean, I think this leader I thought that I was talking about, I think he legit thought he was writing a check. But he also was thinking to himself, I'm the only person in the church that's got enough capital in my account. He's a well-respected, well-loved leader. This is a guy who had enough money in his trust account that he could go out and do that. Well, he ended up not having to write a check because he did it the right way, and it built trust, right? But just think through, what are you doing? And if you're not building trust, then how do you make sure that gets mitigated? Because there are sometimes, Frank, you and I both know this, you just have to make hard decisions, and you're just like, we're just going to have to do this, and it's not going to be a positive thing, and we're going to have to manage our way through it. Transparency, authenticity, making sure the test would be, hey, y'all in the room, we're from the South here, so we say y'all. Although, by the way, I will tell you, I hear that word nationwide, so stop accusing us of being the only ones who say. Those of us who are in here in the room in executive leadership, if the people in our congregation knew what we know here in making this decision, would they respect us for making this decision?
Yeah.
Not agree with us 100% because that's unrealistic, but would they respect us? That's a test, man. And if you could do that, then that's how you avoid inadvertently spending trust when you're trying to build trust. Does that make sense?
That's incredible.
I want that to be helpful. I mean, that's our whole thing here today. So I would say to you, there are other ways. If you can figure out, if you're a church, many nonprofits are members of ECA. Not as many churches, but I do see that as a coming trend. There is a little bit of a hurdle in that for, most churches can meet all the criteria to get ECFA, but the one that seems to get them is the annual audit. Many churches do a biannual audit or something like that. So, but I would just say, if you can find it in your governance, in your will, I would recommend that you consider membership in ECFA as one of the ways through a third-party organization that you can speak to your church on governance and finances and what I call boardroom trust.
Jim, I love this. And I think this episode is one that listeners can take to their teams in the church and process this trust building exercise, whether it be the check or the withdrawal or some other illustration, but they can go, okay, are we doing this? Or are we doing this? Are we building trust? Or are we losing trust? If those are the only two options, when we're making big decisions in the church, what can we do to flip it? Maybe it was going to be a withdrawal. Can we, in this case, build trust if we do it the right way? Or maybe we're acknowledging that it's withdrawal, but what other work are we doing to build trust in other ways because we are going to make this withdrawal when this happens? Going in eyes wide open that the leadership decisions that we're making have an impact on trust, and there's work to be done in the congregation. At the end of the day, this may be frustrating, but trust is another thing that you've got to consistently think about and focus on as you lead.
Yeah. And I love the perspective that you've brought in here, Frank, to do the research, to say this is a real issue. This is not a hypothetical issue. And then let's chat around that. Make trust one of the things. It's kind of like, where you go back to Stephen Covey's whole thing of urgent and important, back in kind of navigating that grid. Yeah. And his whole idea is the things that are important but not urgent don't get enough attention. This is one of those issues. It's super important. It's not knocking on the door. The tyranny of the urgent is not kind of, oh man, you got to work on trust today. But it's super important, and it needs to be a part of what you and your leadership team are paying attention to on a regular basis.
That's so good. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Next Sunday.
What happens next Sunday could change
everything.
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 Hey-oh.
Everything.
We'll see.